Welcome to the Common Sense Policy Group's postgraduate training course, Understanding and Addressing Social Challenges through Applied Statistical Methods, Data Science, and Creative Microsimulation. This is our practical guide to building the quantitative evidence base for transformative policy. The Common Sense Policy Group comprises academics, policymakers, third sector leaders, community representatives, media figures, and people with lived experience. We are all committed to creating a fair, equal, and inclusive Britain through developing and influencing redistributive policy that addresses the inequality and exclusion that has come to define our nation. We conduct research to examine the impact of existing systems and what the prospective benefits of alternatives might be. We develop evidence-based policy proposals that address key modern challenges and achieve popular support. We create outputs and engage with partners to translate research to real-world goals. This is in order to present consensus on feasible, affordable, and overwhelmingly popular evidence-based policies that can form the basis for a programme for progressive government. This course, which is particularly suitable for early career researchers, is based on a textbook that is open access in electronic form entitled Evidence for Transformative Policymaking: Statistics, Microsimulation, and Public Opinion to Achieve Change. The course draws on the textbook's integrated approach, combining economic microsimulation, public opinion research, and narrative persuasion to address Britain's deepest challenges: poverty, inequality, declining health, and crumbling infrastructure. Unlike most policy methods, textbooks, and courses, we treat technical proficiency and political advocacy as inseparable. You will learn to build tax benefit models, conduct distributional analysis, estimate health impacts of economic interventions, and use adversarial co-production to shift the Overton window. You do not need to agree with the specific policies discussed, such as basic income and progressive taxation, to develop essential skills in evidence-based policy development. Throughout, you will benefit from engagement with our practical coding and microsimulation resources in Jupyter notebooks, which will enable you to develop your coding skills and to produce a basic microsimulation as part of your assessment. You will also complete activities after each lecture to consolidate and apply knowledge. We hope that you will find this to be valuable as you develop your final report on which you will receive feedback. This introductory lecture is structured around a central argument: that effective policymaking in the current period of crisis requires three things simultaneously: technical proficiency in quantitative analysis, critical engagement with public opinion, and strategic deployment of narrative persuasion. These are not three separate modules. They are three strands of a single integrated approach, and the course weaves them together from the beginning. We move from diagnosis to method to application. We begin with the material conditions that make transformative policymaking urgent, then examine why conventional approaches to policymaking, both the technocratic and the identity political, have failed progressive ends. We then set out our epistemological position, positivism, combined with honest acknowledgement of uncertainty, and explain how that position shapes every methodological choice that follows. This lecture closes with two topics that are important and under-researched in policy analysis: a careful treatment of uncertainty, framing and bias in evidence production, and a survey of the international data infrastructure that makes the methods here transferable beyond the UK context. We end with the course assessment, the structure of the 3,000-word report, the submission timeline, and why the final step of publishing your work on the Open Science Framework is a genuine career asset rather than an administrative requirement. This course is designed to be as freely accessible as possible. These lectures are available as YouTube videos with auto-generated subtitles. The textbook Evidence for Transformative Policymaking: Statistics, Microsimulation, and Public Opinion to Achieve Change is open access in electronic form, but can also be bought in hard copy from Manchester University Press. While you will gain most benefit from registering to use our Jupyter Notebook practical demonstrations, we have produced YouTube videos of each practical demonstration, so you will be able to follow for free. Beyond this, we have activities associated with PPPC, our Public Policy Preference Calculator. If you have registered for the course, you will also attend the group sessions, in which we will examine and apply the key ideas and build toward your assessment. It is the assessment that provides the key output from this course, a publicly hosted report based on the microsimulation work you will have completed in your practical demonstrations alongside your independent research. By completing the assessment, you will have a piece of research that demonstrates your abilities and makes a direct research contribution to policy development. This is a distinctive outcome from this course. Again, it is important to emphasize the integrated nature of the course. Theory, coding, and public engagement are not separate modules but one continuous workflow. We need to start with a deliberately stark diagnosis. The question, how do we fix societies such as Britain, sounds like a political slogan, but it has a concrete technical answer, and this course is about building the capacity to pursue that answer rigorously. The material conditions are measurable. Home ownership rates for under 40s have collapsed since the 1990s. Real wages for median earners have barely grown since 2008. The ratio of house prices to earnings is at a post-war high. Public services from the National Health Service, NHS, to local government are visibly under strain. The NHS is the publicly funded healthcare system providing comprehensive medical care, free at the point of use to all UK residents, established by the post-war Attlee government in 1948. Infrastructure investment has been repeatedly cancelled, scaled back or privatised in ways that extracted value rather than creating it. We need to make a crucial historical counterpoint. Britain's public debt today is approximately 40% of what it was in 1945. The post-war Labour government built the NHS, the welfare state, and a comprehensive programme of public investment under far more constrained fiscal conditions than exist today. If that was achievable then, the structural barrier to bold reform now is political, not economic. The example of the NHS deserves emphasis. Having the doctor's bill taken away permanently was a psychological change perhaps unprecedented in human history. That is not hyperbole. It is an observation about what the decoupling of illness from financial anxiety does to the lived experience of an entire society. That is the standard of ambition this course is reaching for. It is worth pausing and asking yourself, what would the equivalent of the NHS be for the crises we face today? To understand further the material crises of today, please watch the embedded video, Britain on the Brink. The Common Sense Policy Group's response to this diagnosis is Act Now, published in 2024, our beverage moment. It is a comprehensive, costed programme for renewing British social provision. At its heart is basic income, a largely unconditional payment to all permanent residents, funded by progressive reform of the income tax system. Basic income is not a new idea, but the evidence base for it has grown dramatically in recent years, much of it produced by members of this group. The subsequent lectures will teach you to replicate and extend that analysis yourself. Notice the two levels of question the introduction identifies. The first level is technical. What does this cost? What tax yield is realistic? What are the growth effects? These are questions that microsimulation can answer with reasonable precision, and lectures 4 through 6 develop the capacity to do so. The second level is political. What does the public think, and can a party implement this without electoral harm? The introduction makes a strong claim here that the assumption of fixed, hostile public opinion lacks coherent evidence. Brexit moved from an outlying position to a majority one rapidly in response to changing material conditions and organised argument. The same is possible for progressive reform. Whether it is possible is an empirical question, not a prior assumption, and Lectures 8 and 9 develop the tools to test and act on it. We need to take time to engage seriously with the policy-making literature before departing from it, and this engagement is worth understanding because it explains why the course takes the approach it does. The rational comprehensive model, the idea that policymakers systematically identify problems, generate all possible solutions, evaluate them against explicit criteria, and select the optimum, is the basis of most policy analysis training. We acknowledge this while pointing out its descriptive inadequacy. Real policymakers operate under cognitive constraints, time pressure, and information that is always incomplete. Simon's concept of bounded rationality captures this honestly. The embedded YouTube video explains the approach succinctly. Lindblom's incrementalism is the most realistic descriptive account. Policymakers mostly make small adjustments to existing policies, avoiding large-scale reform because the risks are harder to predict and the political opposition more intense. This is an existential challenge for progressive politics. Incrementalism, in a context of mounting inequality, declining health and climate breakdown, is not stability. It is the choice to let bad things get worse slowly. Kingdon's multiple streams framework offers the most useful lens for the current moment. Policy windows open when a problem is recognised, a feasible solution exists, and the political conditions are right for action. We are in that moment now. The crises are visible and widely felt. The evidence base for transformative solutions is more developed than at any previous point, and the political conditions are more favourable to progressive reform than they have been for decades. This is not a time for incrementalism. It is a time for policy entrepreneurship, and this course develops the tools to support it. These frameworks are not always competing, but complementary lenses. The course uses multiple streams as its primary explanatory frame for current UK politics. The epistemological position underlying this course is stated plainly and unapologetically. We are positivists. Humans are animals subject to external stimuli, and the purpose of policy is to shape those stimuli to produce better outcomes. That is the foundation on which everything that follows is built. We need to be direct about the target of this position. The anti-positivist orthodoxy that has dominated social science for several decades, and which has systematically undermined progressive policymakers' capacity to make the quantitative case for transformative reform. The dismissal of quantitative approaches as treating people like animals, the rejection of causal inference as epistemologically impermissible, these are not just methodological positions. They have political consequences. They have left progressive policymakers without the tools to contest neoliberal quantitative evidence on its own terms. The Starmer government example is instructive. Labour Together's reliance on focus groups and polling that takes people's positions at face value has produced responses to immigration that are both ineffectual and politically counterproductive. When ethnographic research concludes that working-class communities are simply racist, independently of the material pressures of the past 4 decades, it leads to flag-waving rather than addressing poor pay and housing insecurity. This is qualitative research doing real damage by taking expressed positions as fixed expressions of identity rather than as provisional responses to material conditions. The point about qualitative research is important to state carefully. The course does not dismiss qualitative evidence. Adversarial co-production of narratives, developed in Lecture 8, is qualitative in its design. The argument is about qualitative research that is unhinged from concern for broader material reality. Research that treats everything as socially constructed, while dismissing causal analysis as coercive. That methodological position is not neutral. it has a political valence, and it has consistently failed progressive ends. The Starmer government's deference to focus groups that take positions as fixed produced identity-based responses that addressed neither material interests nor electoral coalitions. This is disastrous. We need to devote significant space to understanding why neoliberal policymaking has failed, because understanding the failure is essential to understanding what the alternative requires. The neoliberal commitment to state neutrality has a coherent philosophical foundation. The idea that the state should not promote specific conceptions of the good, because doing so is coercive and violates equality between citizens with different values. The Hayekian tradition from which it derives is intellectually serious, but it has been used to justify the systematic withdrawal of state support for the social determinants of health, education, employment security, and housing. The result is measurable: a significant increase in lifestyle conditions and health inequalities since the late 1970s. Nudging was the policy response to the health and well-being failures produced by neoliberal retrenchment, and it was politically perfect for governments committed to minimal spending. You could claim to be addressing public health without spending money, by using behavioral insights to guide people toward healthier choices. Examples of nudge approaches include placing images of diseased organs on cigarette packets to dissuade smoking. Some of the underpinning ideas regarding human motivation are outlined in the embedded YouTube video. The problem with nudging is that it does not work in terms of the substantive issues we need to address. Meyer et al.'s 2022 meta-analysis is the most important piece of evidence here. It shows that the literature supporting nudging is subject to significant publication bias. Studies showing positive effects are more likely to be published than null results. When that bias is statistically corrected, the evidence for effective nudging across studied outcomes largely disappears. Governments and research organisations have invested many billions in an approach that appears incapable of achieving the ends to which it was applied. This course goes further. Belief in nudging may have actively reduced the efficacy of pandemic responses that relied on it. This is not a minor methodological point. It is an argument that the wrong approach to evidence has had serious consequences for population health. The course builds progressively from foundational methods to integrated advocacy, and it is worth seeing the architecture clearly before diving into the first lecture. Lectures 2 through 4 establish the conceptual foundations, research design, data handling, and the measures that appear in every subsequent lecture's outputs. Lecture 2 is the most abstract: concepts, statistical logic, inference. Lecture 3 is more applied: where does data come from and what are their limitations? After Lecture 3, you will need to complete Practical Demonstration 1, Understanding Python. This notebook provides a rapid introduction to Python, the language we use throughout the course. By the end of this session, you will be able to declare and work with variables of 4 fundamental types, apply arithmetic and comparison operators, write and call functions, control program flow with if statements and for loops, and use lists, dictionaries, and classes to organize data. A short markdown section at the end covers the text formatting used in all subsequent notebooks. No prior programming experience is assumed. Lecture 4 is the toolkit of measures you will use and report: poverty, inequality, equivalence scales, marginal effective tax rates. This leads into Practical Demonstration 2, Python libraries. This notebook introduces the 4 Python libraries used throughout the course for data analysis and visualization: Pandas, NumPy, Matplotlib, and Seaborn. Working from a simple constructed data frame through to 3 real policy data sets, it covers loading and exploring tabular data, Group B operations and pivot tables, survey-weighted statistics with grossing factors, and regression and distribution plots. The three data sets used, the Titanic passenger records, the Households Below Average Income survey, and the Living Costs and Food survey, appear directly in the lecture slides and in the microsimulation model. You will then need to follow practical demonstration 3, combining data from multiple sources. This notebook builds on practical demonstration 2 by introducing the operations needed to combine and aggregate data from multiple sources. Using US state population data alongside the Titanic and LCF datasets from Notebook 1, it covers merging data frames on a shared key, handling missing values explicitly, filtering groups by a condition, and producing grouped statistical summaries with describe and aggregate. The merging operations are directly relevant to the Family Resources Survey, FRS, data preparation in the microsimulation model, where household level and individual level records are joined on a household identifier. The FRS is an annual household survey conducted by the Department for Work and Pensions that provides detailed data on income, benefits and demographics for approximately 17,750 UK households. Lectures 5 through 7 are the technical core of the course, building and using models. Lecture 5 teaches you to build a tax benefit model from scratch in Python. This is the pedagogical foundation for practical demonstration 4, starting to build a tax benefit model. Lecture 6 then introduces advanced models, including the Ladman tax transfer model that underpins the Common Sense Policy Group's research. This feeds into practical demonstration 5, a slightly more complicated model. This extends the simple model with national insurance contributions, value-added tax, VAT, including an option to extend it to currently exempt goods, and an interactive widget interface for changing parameters without editing code. VAT is a consumption tax levied at each stage of production and sale, currently set at 20% on standard rated goods and services in the UK, with a 0 rate applied to essentials such as food and children's clothing. 3 components are written live during the demonstration: the system class that bundles tax benefit parameters, the calc_system function that applies a system to a single household, and the analyze function that compares 2 systems, producing Lorenz curves, Gini and Palmer coefficients, and gainers and losers counts. Practical demonstration 6, developing the model, further introduces separate classes for parameters, result, and household, implements a piecewise multi-band income tax using a while loop, models universal credit with an adult rate, child rate, threshold, and taper, adds child benefit and an unemployment benefit, and implements VAT on a configurable base set of expenditure categories. Lecture 6 moves to the professional grade Landman tax transfer model, used in published research and cited in Hansard. Practical demonstration 1. The Landman economics tax transfer model situates the Landman economics tax transfer model within the UK microsimulation landscape before the hands-on exercises begin. It covers the range of tax benefit models currently in use in the UK, government, academic and consultancy, published examples of what the tax transfer model, TTM, has been used for, the choice of input dataset and the trade-offs between the FRS, LCF and understanding society, and an honest account of the model's strengths and limitations. This contextual knowledge is necessary for interpreting the outputs produced in practical demonstrations 4 to 6 and for writing a credible method section in the course report. Practical demonstration 8, exploring the Landman. TTM is the first hands-on session with the professional grade Landman TTM, running on real Family Resources survey data with the actual 2024 to 25 UK tax and benefit parameter set. The primary objective of the demonstration is to develop fiscal literacy. using the ready reckoner to predict the cost of a reform before running the model, then investigating any discrepancy. Practical demonstration 9. A war on poverty then presents a policy design challenge. Allocate an unexpected £20 billion to reduce poverty as far as possible. The notebook provides a fiscal ready reckoner listing the approximate cost of each available reform and asks participants to plan and test a package using the TTM. Practical demonstration 10. A basic income adds basic income parameters to the TTM interface, allowing you to set weekly payments for 6 age groups and to configure means-tested benefit disregards that protect the income of the very poorest households. The exercise introduces the concept of fiscal neutrality, designing a package whose increased benefit spending is offset by tax increases, and asks participants to iterate toward a neutrally funded scheme. The outputs are interpreted alongside the published Common Sense's basic income research referenced in the notebook links, placing your own modelling in the context of peer-reviewed findings. Lecture 7 explains how modelling can be extended to health impacts, combining the economic microsimulation with panel data, econometrics, and health economic valuation. Lectures 8 and 9 are the advocacy component. How do you translate technical evidence into political impact? Lecture 8 introduces the Triple PC, the Public Policy Preference Calculator, which integrates conjoint analysis of public preferences with the economic and health modelling of lectures 5 through 7. Lecture 9 introduces adversarial co-production, working with opponents of evidence-based policy to develop the narratives that can actually shift opinion. The progression is deliberate. You cannot do lectures 8 and 9 without lectures 2 through 7. You cannot use the Triple PC meaningfully without understanding what microsimulation produces and what conjoint analysis measures. The course is designed to be worked through in sequence. Lecture 10 draws together the threads of all the content and suggests avenues for application of the ideas and skills we cover in the course. We need to foreground the problem of uncertainty and framing before examining methods. This is not a perfunctory caveat, it is a substantive argument about what honest evidence-based policymaking requires. Pudney and Sutherland's 1994 analysis showed that microsimulation models produce estimates subject to multiple compounding sources of uncertainty. Sampling variability means our household-level estimates are never exactly right. Data limitations mean the survey data does not perfectly represent the population. Model specification means the choices about which rules to implement and how to implement them introduce systematic error. Static assumptions about behaviour mean the model does not capture how people change their work or spending in response to policy changes. None of these sources of uncertainty is eliminable by better technique. They are irreducible features of modelling complex social systems. The more subtle point is that modelling choices are framing decisions. The choice to present distributional effects by income decile rather than by disability status is not a neutral technical decision. It shapes what policymakers and the public see. The choice to report poverty headcounts rather than Foster-Greer. Thorbecke severity indices changes the apparent policy implication. These choices reflect considered judgments, but they are choices, and we need to be explicit about this throughout. The same applies to survey design. The literature on welfare policy attitudes is clear that support for welfare and support for assistance to the poor are measured differently from the same population on the same day. Questions that make costs salient reduce expressed support for spending. Questions that frame recipients as undeserving reduce support for benefits. The Labour government's reliance on polling that takes expressed preferences at face value without testing sensitivity to alternative framings risks exactly the circularity the introduction describes, confirming priors about what is politically feasible rather than discovering what the public would actually support if better informed. We do not claim that framing can be eliminated, it cannot. The response is transparency, reflexivity, and strategic deployment. Open source code and detailed documentation allow external verification. Conjoint analysis partially overcomes single question framing by forcing trade-offs. Adversarial co-production harnesses narrative framing explicitly, producing frames that opponents themselves find credible. We now need to examine briefly the international data landscape. This matters for two reasons. First, the methods we develop are transferable. A reader working in Germany can apply the within-between health modelling approach using the German socio-economic panel, which collects the same short form, SF, 12 health measures as Understanding Society. A reader in the United States can apply the fiscal microsimulation approach using Current Population Survey, CPS, data and tax simulation model, TaxSim. A researcher wanting to do cross-national comparative work can use Euromod with EU statistics on income and living conditions, SILC data. Euromodi is the EU tax benefit microsimulation model maintained by the Joint Research Centre that simulates fiscal policy reforms across member states using EU SILC. SILC is the EU-wide survey, providing harmonised data on income, poverty, and living standards across member states. The specific datasets change, the analytical framework does not. Second, comparative evidence strengthens the domestic case for reform. When modelling shows basic income is affordable and distributionally progressive in the UK, that is important. When EUR-OMOD modelling shows comparable schemes have been assessed as feasible across multiple European countries using a common framework, the case becomes considerably harder to dismiss as British eccentricity or left-wing wishful thinking. Comparative evidence is a strategic asset in domestic policy advocacy. The specific datasets are worth knowing because they will appear in the literature you read and potentially in work you might conduct. Euromod and EUSILC are the European standards for distributional microsimulation. The US has multiple competing models including the Tax Policy Center and Congressional Budget Office, CBO, reflecting the federal and partisan structure of American fiscal policy. The Panel Study of Income Dynamics, PSID, is the world's longest-running nationally representative household panel. Its longevity makes it uniquely valuable for studying long-run inequality and intergenerational mobility. The Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe, SHARE, panel, is the European equivalent of Understanding Society for older populations. We hope this course enables you to produce the kinds of comprehensive, integrated evidence that can genuinely influence policy outcomes and contribute to rebuilding Britain through transformative change. That is not an aspiration. It is a claim about what the methods in this course, applied rigorously and communicated effectively, can achieve. Before we move into the first lecture proper, let me take 5 minutes to explain how you will be assessed on this course. I want to be clear about what is expected, what support you will receive, and why the assessment is designed the way it is. There are activities within each lecture that you need to complete in order to develop your ability to apply core ideas to actual issues. Beyond these activities, we will work through the Jupyter notebooks together. The exercises are designed to enable you to embed understanding before you commence the end of project assessment. The assessed component is summative, but a precondition of award of your course certification, a 3,000-word research report. The topic is your choice, subject to one constraint. It must address a policy approach to reducing poverty or inequality in the UK, and it must draw directly on the microsimulation code and outputs you have developed in the Jupyter notebooks during the course. This is not a literature essay, it is a policy research report, and the core of it, the results section, is your own original quantitative analysis. The structure follows a standard academic reporting format. You will have an introduction of 250 words setting out your policy question and why it matters. There is then a literature review of 500 words to situate your analysis in the existing evidence base. This will need to be concise and targeted, not exhaustive. The 250 words methods section will explain what you modelled and how. You will then have 750 words to present your microsimulation findings. This will lead into a 1,000-word discussion, providing the analytical core of the assessment in which you interpret your findings, connecting them to the literature, acknowledging limitations and drawing policy implications. You will conclude with the conclusion of 250 words. All word counts include in-text citations. You will need to add an accurate and consistently formatted bibliography and an appendix containing your full code and the dataset used. The timeline is designed to give you genuine support after the course ends. You have 1 week to write and submit the first version of your report. Within a further week, you will receive detailed written feedback. You then have 2 weeks to revise in response to that feedback before submitting the final version. This is condensed approximation of the peer review process, and it is intentional. Learning to revise in response to expert critique is one of the most important skills in academic research, and it rarely gets taught explicitly. The final step, uploading to Pure and to the Open Science Framework, is the part that is unusual for a taught course, and I want to explain why it is there. Open Science Framework is a free, permanent, citable repository. When you upload your report and code there, it receives a Digital Object Identifier, DOI. A DOI is a permanent alphanumeric reference code assigned to digital documents, such as journal articles and datasets, enabling them to be reliably cited and found online. It is publicly findable. It appears on your curriculum vitae, CV, not as a course assignment, but as a published piece of policy analysis. If you go on to work in government, a think tank, a research consultancy, or an academic department, you will be able to point a potential employer to a real piece of quantitative policy research you have produced. That is the CV-enhancing element the slide refers to, and it is real, not aspirational. If you have any questions about the assessment, please email the course leader, Elliot Johnson at elliot.johnson@northumbria.ac.uk, or raise them in the catch-up sessions. Let me draw together the 5 claims that have run through this introduction, because seeing them as a coherent argument matters for everything that follows. The first claim is diagnostic. Britain is in crisis, and the structural conditions for bold reform are more favourable now than at any point since 1945. Public debt is a fraction of what it was when the NHS was built. The evidence base for transformative policy is incomparably more developed. The crises are visible and widely felt. The barrier to reform is political and analytical, not economic or epistemic. The second claim is methodological. Transformative policymaking requires an integrated capability that combines quantitative rigour, public opinion analysis, and strategic narrative persuasion. The dominant tradition in progressive politics has treated these as separate. Technical experts produce the evidence, communicators package it, politicians deploy it. That separation has consistently failed. This course treats them as inseparable, because they are. The third claim is epistemological. Evidence is always framed, and the response is not to pretend otherwise. Every modelling choice, which data set to use, which measure of poverty to report, which households to count as gainers, is a framing decision. The appropriate response is transparency about those decisions, open source code that allows replication and challenge, and the explicit use of framing as a strategic tool rather than its denial. The adversarial co-production work in Lecture 8 is not a departure from rigorous evidence, it is its logical extension. The fourth claim is structural. The course builds in a specific order because each layer of capability depends on the one before. You cannot run the triple PC meaningfully without understanding what microsimulation produces. You cannot interpret microsimulation outputs without understanding the data they are drawn from. You cannot assess the credibility of your findings without understanding research design. We start tomorrow with research design because it is the foundation on which every subsequent lecture rests. The fifth claim is the one I want to leave you with. By the end of this course, you will be working at the level of sophistication of published policy research. Not learning about it, doing it. The final report you submit will be a real piece of quantitative policy analysis. When it is uploaded to the Open Science Framework and assigned a DOI, it will be publicly findable and citable. That is not a consolation prize for a course that does not lead to a formal qualification. It is a more direct route to demonstrating analytical capability to a future employer than most postgraduate credits are. Lecture 1 begins the substantive work. It covers the research design foundations that underpin everything else. Research questions, reproducibility, the distinction between prediction and explanation, inference, statistical significance and confidence intervals. If you have encountered these concepts before, the lecture will sharpen and deepen your understanding of them. If you have not, it will give you the conceptual framework within which the technical methods that follow will make sense. Either way, it is where we start.